I had the chance recently to talk with some researchers who are studying resilience, and they wanted to understand what happens when people face really dramatic and stressful change in their lives. And what they saw is that people tend to fall into one of three groups. The first group of people face that traumatic event, dip down a little bit in terms of their functioning, but then they're able to recover and go back to where they were before. A second group of people face that event. They have that dip down in functioning, but they never really manage to heal or get back to where they were before. They're always functioning at a little lower level than they were previously. And then there's a third group, and that group actually faces the challenge. They dip down a little bit during that difficult time, but then they go on and recover, and they actually learn and grow to where they can perform at higher levels than ever before. Now, clearly, those people are the most resilient, and it's what we all want to be as individuals, and it's what organizations need us to be as well. And so organizations need to build a resilient culture that's capable of bouncing back from those kinds of events, because resilience is critical to growth and survival today. Dramatic changes are just part of everyday life in business. Competition is fierce, and markets can be volatile and uncertain. And so leaders can't afford to let their company be the one that doesn't bounce back. But this demands a group of workers who are more highly engaged. They're flexible and they're agile, and they're really the essence of resilience. It's really important that we recognize the situation that a lot of organizations are facing, which is that there are a lot fewer people who are engaged. In fact, 1 out of 3 workers are disengaged at work. Think about that. 1 out of 3. That's really pretty concerning for organizations, because disengaged people, those are the ones that are just doing enough to avoid getting fired. You know, they can really slow down progress. They can cost organizations time and money, and more importantly, opportunities. But building a resilient culture is really complex. And so Steelcase has been looking at those variables that go into engagement. We really wanted to know, can the workplace help? And if so, what kinds of changes could make the biggest difference? We conducted a study with a global research firm, Ipsos, and we did this study in 17 countries with over 12,000 participants. And we learned a lot of really interesting things, like we did learn that there were more disengaged employees than engaged. But here's the most important thing we found, that the workplace can help. We actually found that there was a correlation between how satisfied and happy people are with their work environment and how engaged they are. But the people who were unhappy with their workplace were the ones who were the most disengaged at work. So we see that there's 37% of the global workforce that's disengaged, and at the other end of the spectrum, 34% who are engaged. And so you can already see that balancing act. You can already see that there's a risk there for organizations. And in the middle, you've got that 29% that's kind of neutral. And so the disengaged people can actually negate the efforts of the people who are really highly engaged and really working hard toward the organization's purposes. But here's the good news in all of this. Now that we know that the workplace can make a difference, we can begin to think about how to design spaces that can actually help people to be more engaged and to be more resilient. And so that takes us to another key finding in our study. Employees who have more choice and control over where and how they work are more likely to be highly engaged. Employees who have control over various aspects of their work experience were more engaged in general. And what that looks like is that those employees have the option to choose where to work in the office based on the work that they're doing. Sometimes we need moments of privacy and to be alone and to focus, and other times we need to be in a more social situation. And the people who could choose this were more likely to be highly engaged. In fact, 88% of people who were highly engaged had this option. But the people who were disengaged had it far less frequently. Only 14% of them had that option. And when you look at how that plays itself out, the more often people had that option to choose where to work based on what they needed to do, the more they went from being highly disengaged to moving up toward higher levels of engagement. And so that's a really important lesson for us to learn. And it's a really important strategy that organizations can think about to help boost engagement. Another thing that we found about employees who were highly engaged is that they have the ability to concentrate easily. And they can also work in groups and teams without being disrupted or interrupted. It gives us an insight that people who are more highly engaged actually have the ability to control their privacy. And we all need to control our privacy throughout the day. Whether it be that we just need to focus and concentrate on our own, we need to relax for a minute, or we just want to make a personal phone call, maybe, without everybody hearing. Those are different aspects of our privacy that we want to control. And the people who have that ability to control it in their workplace are more likely to be highly engaged. We also saw people who were highly engaged had the option to move throughout the day. They could choose where they could go, how to change their postures, and just be able to move around the environment. They could easily share ideas and exchange thoughts with their colleagues. And so this begins to paint a picture of people who have the ability to control the things that they need to feel more energized at work. Overall, we begin to get this picture of people who are more highly engaged. They have that ability to control what's happening to them throughout the day and to feel like, they have a say in what their work experience is like on a daily basis. And we saw that fixed technology in the workplace actually outpaces mobile technology by a ratio of about 2-to-1. And you can see it looking at this, there's a lot more fixed technology, landlines and desktop computers, than there are mobile technology, mobile phones and laptops and tablets. And the reason this is important is because when we think about giving people control and choice, is your technology can either enable that or it can be a constraint. If I only have fixed technology, I don't really have the option to move from my desk. And sometimes that's the nature of my job. Sometimes jobs do require us to be at our desk most of the time. But the thing for organizations to think about is that if they do want to create a more resilient culture and boost levels of engagement, they need to make sure that their technology strategy is in line with their culture strategy. Another finding that we saw that was quite interesting in the study is really how prevalent traditional work styles still are today. The reality for most people is they're still working in pretty traditional environments that are oftentimes based on hierarchy. We saw that 60% of the workforce is actually working in individual or enclosed or shared private offices. The thing for organizations to think about is that work is changing so much today. It's changing so rapidly. Is their workplace really keeping up with that kind of change that's going on? There were a lot of things that we've learned about the state of the workplace in this study, and some really fascinating areas that we really want to dig deeper and understand. But the cumulative findings of this study allowed us to really bring that together with our ongoing qualitative work and begin to get a sense of how to design a workplace that can help people to be more engaged, and how to go about building a culture that is more resilient. And so a resilient workplace it's different. And what makes it different is it's based on two key principles: thinking about people and thinking about place. So let's talk about that just a little bit more. Workplaces that are designed for people's well-being really needs to think about people's well-being from a holistic perspective. It needs to think about people's physical well-being, certainly, but also think about people's cognitive and emotional well-being. And what we've learned from neuroscience is that those three things all go together. You really can't separate them. They each have an impact on each other. And so that's an important part of the equation to helping to create a resilient workplace. But we also need to think about a place that's designed as an ecosystem of spaces, that has a range of spaces that people can choose from. You know, an ecosystem in the workplace is a lot like an ecosystem in nature. It's evolving and changing as it needs to adapt. And so that's what our workplaces need to be as well. And those workplaces really need to take into account the fact that people are doing different things throughout the day. They're not just working in one mode of work. They're actually going throughout their day with a rhythm where they're moving back and forth, doing things like socializing and collaborating, and we're learning from other people. Or sometimes they just need to rejuvenate throughout the day. And so those different modes of work really need this ecosystem of spaces that can help them support their needs for different postures, for example. They need to be able to sit and stand and move throughout the day. And also, that workplace really needs to support their need for privacy, because we all have times throughout the day where we need to be able to control that, either because we need to focus or because we just want to make a phone call and have a little privacy when we're doing that, right? And then we also need to think about presence, because in today's way of working, I might be present in the room, in a meeting with my colleagues, but I also might be present virtually through telepresence with colleagues all over the world. And when I'm working like that, I need to make sure that I have both digital and analog forms of communication that I can use that will enable me to work and innovate with people from all over the world. Time and time again, our research showed us that the people who felt like their organizations cared about them as individuals, that cared about their well-being, those people were the most highly engaged. And creating a resilient workplace is a really tangible way that business leaders can demonstrate to people that they do really care. So this is a recipe of sorts for how to design a resilient workplace. And like any good recipe, it needs to be modified. You need to change it and adapt it based on your culture, based on your country culture. You need to think about it differently because no two companies are the same. But the principles are universal. I'm not here to suggest to you that changing your workplace is going to solve every problem that you might have with engagement. But what I am going to ask you to think about is this. Do you feel a sense of choice and control over where and how you work? Is your office designed to help you do your best thinking? And for business leaders, I'd ask them, are your employees having a great experience? Now, if the answer to those questions are yes, that's great. But chances are there's going to be a lot more no's. And so in that situation, I'd ask, as employees, are you willing to settle for anything less than a great experience at work? Wouldn't it be nice if you could look forward to coming into the office at least most of the time? And for business leaders, I'd ask, can you afford to maintain the status quo? Can you build a resilient organization if most of your employees are disengaged? And can you risk being that organization that doesn't bounce back? Thank you.